Now it's time for another Board Game Brawl preview with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Battle for Sularia, and it's from Punch It Entertainment. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page. I'm going to have a link at the bottom of your screen now and at the end of the video, and also down in the description section of this video. That will take you to the official Kickstarter page for Battle for Sularia. You can find out even more information, more than I could possibly tell you here about the game, and hopefully you'll consider backing the project. Now, what is Battle for Sularia? This is a competitive head-to-head two-player game. Each player takes control of a different faction in this world of Sularia. You're either going to be the noble Jotun who live in like these isolated societies with high technology and who are now branching back out into this world that they themselves led to destruction in order to gain this ore Solarium. And you're going to be fighting against the Scythian, who are the synthetic race that the Jotun actually created generations ago in the lore of Battle for Sularia. You're going to construct your deck ahead of time, go at it combating, getting different resources and different sites, trying to conquer your opponent. Let's go ahead and take a brief look at how the game is played with a prototype version of the game. Then we're going to come back and I'll let you know what I think. Alright, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of Battle for Sularia. Now, a couple of things I want to note ahead of time. This is only a prototype copy of the game, so bear in mind that everything that you see here, as well as some of the rules that I explained, could change in the final version, so just keep that in mind. The other thing is that I'm going to play with the two basic starter decks, but this game is all about deck construction, really, after you get past your initial couple of games. You can build the deck out with the type of loadout that you want to customize your game experience. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my final thoughts. Now in front of me here I have the Scythian deck with my starting hand. This is the Jotun deck with its starting hand. You're just going to have to find something that you keep track of your 25 life points. So here I have 2d20s here just to keep track of that. And a lot of the game relies on different areas of your little tableau here. So for instance, right next to your starting deck, you're going to have an area for the damaged and discarded cards, and then also for your destroyed cards. Then over here below your deck, you're going to have a whole row of cards which are going to be your influence cards, which you'll be placing in order to accrue influence to cast the different cards that rely on that. Over above your influence row, you're going to have the different site rows. You're going to have the front site and the rear site rows. Some of the sites that you play, that's not that actually is a site by coincidence. But just as an example, you'll be playing cards into your front row. If they're in front of cards that are in your rear site row, then they're actually protected. Your opponent can't get to them unless they have the special fly ability. So let me go ahead and show you some of the cards that come in the game. We'll start with the Jotun cards, which have the blue border sitting. Let's see if I can focus that a bit. Here's an example of one of the combatant cards. There are different types of cards in the game. Combatants are one of them. This is the Bullthorn Warlord. This is the cost of the card up in the top corner in Solarium, which is what you're going to use to summon combatants. Then you have lists of different special abilities, and for instance, he has the flight ability, which I just briefly mentioned there. He says that during a joint strike force, Bullthorn Warlord and all attackers that you control that participate in a joint strike force with the Bullthorn Warlord get +3/+0 this attack. That means down here at the bottom you have attack and you have defense. That means they're going to get +3 to their attack. Here's another combatant, Lord Owathki the Hawk, a type 1 combatant. By the way, the types are referring to how many of that type of cards you can actually have in play. So since he's a type 1, he's a unique character. He has flight and focus 2. You may establish one Jotun site for 1 less influence each turn. Focus is a bonus that he's going to get to his attack and to his defense. And then you have his attack and defense there at the bottom. Another combatant, the Gray Harrier. I'm not going to go over every single one, but here's the site cards. This is one you'll place into one of your site rows. You can activate it to target Jotun combatant you control. Gets +2/+2 this turn. You see it has its own attacks and defense. Then you have cards like the Watchtower, which is another type of site. There's just flavor text there, so that's a bit of an easier one for you to bring out onto the battlefield. And then, just as another example, here's one of the tactic cards, which is strength in numbers, which is going to say that strength in numbers is only playable during your Solarium phase. When you play strength in numbers, you gain X Solarium, where X is equal to the number of all Jotun combatants that you control. So this is a type of kind of a spell card that you can cast. Here's a condition, the Art of War. All Jotun combatants you control get +1/+1. If you control a Jotun type 1 combatant, instead, Art of War provides +2/+2 to all Jotun combatants that you control, so it gets enhanced if that's the case. And then I'll show you another condition, the Spoils of War. When you play Spoils of War, you may put 1 Solarium counter on target Jotun site you control. Each Solarium counter put on the site this way will generate 1 additional Solarium for the controller of that site. Oh, and by the way, in case you were wondering, some of the cards up in the top right corner of the card, this is actually, while this may be the cost of the card, this is actually the Solarium that the card will generate from turn to turn. So some cards, when you cast them, will stay in play and will also give you more and more Solarium. Now let's take a look at some of these Scythian cards. They have the same basic layout as the Jotun cards. Up here, notice that this is a different type of symbol. You may have seen this on a couple of the Jotun cards as well. This is actually an influence cost that you would have to pay. Experimental Weapons Base is one of the sites. It's a type 4. All system sites you control get +2/+0. The Perimeter Alert System, another type of site. The Solarium Excavator. And then you have one of the Scythian. This is one of the tactics. Defense Override. All sites controlled by opponent get -0/-2 until the end of turn. Here's an example of one of the Scythian combatants, an Assault Synthoid, which has 5 Solarium cost and is actually generates -1 Solarium, but notice it has really high attack and defense. And here's some mercenary cards, which you may use to, some start off in the deck and some you can use to flesh out your deck through deck construction. So you see they have their own costs as well. This is one of the tactics cards. Target site you control gets +5/+0 and Alpha Strike, which is kind of like you deal your damage first type thing during combat. Now the easiest way to run you through the game is just to go through a typical turn and how that's going to entail. You're going to have your hand of cards. The first thing you're going to do, at least on round 1, is do your there's a couple extra things you'll do after round 1, but typically the first thing you're going to do is decide to play any of your cards down into your influence row. Some of the cards that you preferably want to play down here are cards like Tactics and Conditions, which will also benefit you with Solarium. But you play as many cards as you want here. Remember that those cards that you play face down, you won't be able to use them for their other side, but you will be able to gain influence off of them as the turns go by. Now the next thing you have the chance to do is to play site cards. So remember I said that you would have a front and rear row of site cards, and you can play a number of site cards equal to the number of influence cards that you have in play. So the cost. Now the next thing you can do is play site cards. Remember that I mentioned that you can play site cards into a front and a rear row. Now every site card has an influence cost, and you can play a number of site cards equal to or less than the amount of influence you currently have in your row. That's your influence pool. So let's actually say that I have 5 influence out here. The total combined cost of these 2 sites is actually 5. So I'm going to go ahead and put 1 in the front row, the one with the most defense, and 1 into the rear row, which means that if my opponent wants to get to my rear site, they're going to have to go through my front, or they're going to have the flight ability. Next to the Solarium phase, this is where the cards that you have in play, which at this point is just these 2, is going to give me Solarium that is going to go into my Solarium pool and allow me to play combatants, and that is the next phase of the game. I can take combatant cards in my hand that I have enough Solarium to field by placing them down into my combatant zone. However, on the first turn that they are out in the field, they're going to come into play activated, which means I'm going to turn the card 90 degrees, showing that I cannot use them on this turn. In subsequent rounds, at the start of the round, you're going to reactivate all cards that have been previously activated from the last turn. Next comes the combat phase, which we're going to go back to in a minute. Then there's the end phase, where you simply discard down until you have no more than 7 cards in hand. And like I said, on subsequent turns, you'll reactivate cards that have been activated. Also, on subsequent turns at the beginning of the round, at the beginning of your turn, you're going to draw 2 cards into hand. Now, a couple things before we get to combat. One is the idea of thresholds on Tactics and Condition cards. Instead of the normal influence or Solarium symbol for the cost. Instead, the tactics and condition cards will have a threshold, which just means that if you have accrued that much influence, you can just play the card either from your hand or down in the influence row. And if it's played from the influence row, it actually stays there. It continues to provide influence for you from turn to turn, as well as letting you use the ability. So the influence, or the threshold cost here is 4 influence. I have that, so I'm able to utilize the card. Now let's talk about combat a bit. The way that combat is going to work is that I'm going to attack my opponent's sights. And remember that unless I have the flight ability, I'm not going to be able to attack my opponent's rear row. Now in this case, just because of this is the example I chose, the Gray Harrier here actually does have the flight ability. So let's say that a subsequent turn goes, my Gray Harrier is active, I can go ahead and attack with that, and if I can get to the rear row, then I can deal damage to the defenses of that sight. Now the defense of combatants just regenerates instantly, so you have to deal all of your damage all in one shot if it's not cumulative, so you have to worry about that. You also have to worry about your opponent potentially having defenses out as well. Although it is possible for you to do a joint strike force. This is where you have more than one combatant attack all at the same time. And if that happens, then your opponent can defend them individually, but otherwise your strike force, which may in fact have special abilities because some abilities actually affect joint strike forces, they're going to have to deal with all of that. So essentially we have Lord Owathki here and the Gray Harrier who are both attacking. They both have flight. Lord Owathki has focus 2, which means that since he's the attacker, he's going to add +2 to his combat right off the bat. In addition to that, the defender would have to have flight in order to even defend against me. Now, let's just theoretically say that this character did have flight, just for the purposes of this example, and was able to defend. Now, this character doesn't happen to have any attack, this combatant, I should say, but it does have 2 defense. So, I could, if I was the red player, the Scythian player here, I could go ahead and block against this one Jotun just to make sure that that damage doesn't get through, although that does mean that that combatant is going to be destroyed. But then everything else is actually going to go through my opponent as damage against his sight.
Now you might be asking, how do I actually damage my opponent? Well, that's in 2 different ways. One is blast through damage. This is where if I were to attack my opponent and surpass the amount of damage, the defense rating of the enemy sight, that extra damage goes through and damages my opponent. In addition, if I actually destroy the sight, that influence, the influence rating of that sight is subtracted from my opponent's life points. So in that way, destroying sights is really the best and most efficient way to take down your opponent and to win the game. That is just a very quick run through of Battle for Sularia. Now, let's get to my final thoughts.
The first thing you're going to notice about Battle for Sularia is the theme and the artwork and the graphic design, which helps to bring out that theme. It's high science fiction of this noble, so-called superior warrior race of the Jotun, who are trying to fight against the Scythian, a race that they themselves created. And both of them have a very distinct and unique artwork that's very high quality, and how it's done, especially together with just the card graphic design, the borders, and how the game looks. It looks very slick and high-tech, which is the feel of the world as well, and definitely what they were going for there at Punch-It Entertainment. Then you add that together with the mechanisms of the game. You know, there's a lot of collectible card games, a lot of living card games, and Battle for Sularia has deck building aspects similar to those games. I don't mean deck building like Dominion, where you're building it as you play, but you're constructing a deck ahead of time. And for people who want that kind of feeling like you might get from a game like Magic the Gathering, but you don't want to be chasing booster packs and chasing rares and things like that, then Battle for Sularia is really going to appeal to you, because you can start off with starter decks if you want to, but you can also mix in other cards, start building and fleshing out your own deck and customizing it the way you want it to be customized, using mercenaries and things like that, and then just going at it with your opponent. So it gives you that feel in a box that a lot of people like. And there's a lot of interesting parts about the gameplay itself. You have the whole influence track and all the different resources and how those are handled, but putting cards down to represent your influence, and also summoning combatants in a tried and true manner of trying to take over enemy sites, and sometimes combining forces of your combatants, and just generally having to use hand management in a clever way from turn to turn in order to outwit your opponent, along with a host of different special abilities and keywords that you have to take the best advantage of. When you combine all these different things, the theme and the design and the graphic design and artwork and just the interesting mechanisms that are at play there, while some things may be reminiscent of other collectible card games and living card games, it comes together into a more unique package, one that's going to appeal to a lot of people who love those types of games but just don't want the hassle of just trying to keep up with a trading card game. And if you're one of the people who thinks like that, and if you want to give this game a shot, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page. I'm going to have a link right now at the bottom of your screen, and then down in the description section of the video, that will take you to the official page. Find out more information, and hopefully you'll consider backing Battle for Sularia from Punch It Entertainment. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.